Is this crazy? We stand on the verge of the 4 greatest years in the history. Make America great again. How can you be against it?
Are the American courts backing President Trump's decisions or halting them? Is the Supreme Court handing the White House wins or slowing it down? There is so much at stake right now that's going through the courts, from the mass firings of federal workers to deporting and imprisoning immigrants to firing inspectors general. Today on Sidebar, we're diving into the role of the courts and if they're likely to hold up or green light Trump's goals. I'm Libby Casey in our Washington Post studio with my colleagues Rhonda Colvin, who's a senior political journalist, and James Hohmann, columnist and editorial writer. Well, we already have some basic answers to the questions I just asked. But before we even dive into the cases and how the courts are weighing in, I want to get your sense, James, of the Trump strategy, because it really does seem like there's a, do things, don't ask permission, don't even ask for forgiveness later, act like you got the yes answer and just plow forward. What's the philosophy of this Trump like Trump 47, right? Not even Trump 45.
Very different. I remember we're called Sidebar because this vodcast started around Trump's trials, and he came out of those really not at least criminally held accountable or responsible in any way, even though he was found guilty. And the Supreme Court's immunity decision last July really emboldened him and made him feel like he can get away with an awful lot. And he is not surrounded by the kind of constraints, the sorts of adults in the room that were there in the first term. And so right now there is a desire. It's Trump himself, but it's also Stephen Miller, his deputy chief of staff, who spent the last 4 years that they were in the wilderness thinking through, if we get power back, how can we push the limits? What are avenues that we didn't even think to try in the first term? And let's do so much so fast, muzzle velocity, as Steve Bannon puts it, that no one can stop us. And maybe they'll pull us back later, but it'll be too late. We're just they hit the mentality at the White House is speed kills, just move fast, break things, don't apologize. And they feel like they have a mandate to do that. And so the result is that there's like 180 lawsuits against them in court. And you really literally need a spreadsheet to keep up with everything that's going on. But that is by design.
You mentioned a spreadsheet, but our colleagues at the Washington Post have just published this great tracker that is way more simple than a spreadsheet, right? But I do want to point folks to it. It's Justin Juvenile and Ann Marimo, who are Supreme Court reporters, and they've looked at all these different initiatives. And where are they? Are they red? They've been halted? Are they sort of in that orange yellow category? They're being slowed, or green? Have they been given the green light? If you're watching us on YouTube, you'll see it there. If you're listening to us on a podcast feed, go check it out on the Washington Post website. But I want to start with one where the Trump administration has gotten a lot of green lights, and that is with the firings of federal workers. James, talk to us about the plight of federal workers and what the courts have said.
The courts have essentially allowed the administration to move forward with rolling back various job protections, but also with moving to get rid of probationary workers who lack civil service protections, employment protections. In many cases, they've worked less than 2 years. And this has been complicated by the fact that there are multiple lawsuits, some of them brought by state level attorney generals, some of them brought by environmental groups who say that they're going to be harmed because there's going to be not people at the EPA enforcing the law, for example. And so they've been all over the country. And essentially, the administration started by just getting rid of all these probationary workers, marching them out, and they've sort of been forced to bring a lot back in. And the cases have been moving in different ways, but essentially the most recent decision by the Supreme Court this week says that they don't have to keep hiring the probationary workers back. And so, it's a moment of uncertainty because the Supreme Court didn't make a decision on the merits.
Yeah, well, so I just want to, so two things. Probationary employees, as you mentioned, they don't have the protections that other civil servants might have because they're newer to the job. They haven't gone through that probationary period. But as we know, because we've widely reported on this, a lot of people who've just been promoted to a new job, who maybe have worked actually in the government for many years. It's a lot of different, case by case basis. But a lower court said you can't do this. You got to bring him back on the job, and the Supreme Court said no. But it's narrow. Explain why it's narrow and why that matters.
So the Supreme Court basically said that the groups that brought this lawsuit, and that was the environmental groups, didn't have standing. It's a word, it's a legal word, but it's important, and essentially it means you can't demonstrate that you would be harmed by these people being unemployed. That according to the Supreme Court, the proper plaintiff would be a federal worker who actually could easily demonstrate harm, or even a public employee union, which would demonstrate harm. And so essentially it's saying, like, go back to the drawing board. You're not the right litigant, but they're not actually taking a position on the merits of whether Trump should be able to get rid of these people.
Other things, though, that the Trump administration has been allowed to do is proceed with the DOJ service itself, which is what's, the organization within the government that's deciding all these firings and stuff. Rhonda, if you're a federal worker, I guess the question is, do you take these things as minor setbacks or major blows? Because it's like the merits of the case are narrow. It's about standing.
Mm-hmm.
But in the end of the day, if the court says, yeah, you can go ahead and fire those probationary workers, that kind of cuts to the bone. That's the point of it.
Yeah, I think we're still reporting out how federal workers are feeling about this because there is so much uncertainty. There are some federal workers who have returned to work after being fired, but yet they don't know the future. And you can sort of see, too, because most of these things with the court reacting to Trump, these have been under emergency rulings. So these are, as James said, they are not really ruling on the actual consideration or the application. It's a lot of procedural rulings and fast-paced rulings. So you can almost expect that this is not the end for federal workers and any sort of charges or lawsuits, that the thousands of them who have been let go or pressured to be retired or whatever the case is. You can see that this is going to just be probably a longer story than many thought it would be. And it's really going to tie up both the lower courts and the Supreme Court.
So, yeah, and they've been super permissive on the voluntary resignations. There was initially a lawsuit aimed at stopping when DOJ said, if you want to take the fork in the road. And the second thing that's hugely consequential is the courts have been very permissive of Trump firing people at these independent agencies, basically getting control of what are supposed to be historically designed by Congress to be independent of the president. So the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, for example, they allowed the Trump folks to really clean house. And the inspectors general, remember there was a Friday night massacre where Trump came in and fired, I think, 17 in one night. The head of the Office of Special Counsel, which is not like Bob Mueller, but is someone who actually enforces ethics rules in the government. And courts have, even if lower level courts have blocked it temporarily, the higher courts have said, no, that's okay. And so this week there was a big Supreme Court decision where Chief Justice John Roberts said that the administration can go ahead with firing two different workers, that they can be removed from their jobs pending actually looking at the merits of this. And it's hugely significant because in one of the cases, it's a Democratic appointee to the National Labor Relations Board. And in the other, it's a Democratic appointee to the Merit Protection Board, which is supposed to weigh if a federal worker was improperly fired. And the administration has very explicitly said the play here is to get the Supreme Court to overturn a 1936 or 1937 decision called the Humphreys Executor. And that was a big New Deal decision where the court said executive agencies can be independent if Congress wills them to. It was a major decision that essentially for 90 years has allowed the executive branch to function the way it does. They want to undo that. And so these two women said, we should continue to be in our role while this plays out in the court. And the Trump people said, no, because you could really do a lot of damage if you're, it could take 6 months to figure out whether or not we can overturn this precedent. And so Chief Justice Roberts said the two women can be removed pending the Supreme Court hearing it, and then they could potentially get their jobs back. But what that signals to me is John Roberts believes that the Trump administration is going to prevail on the merits, and that they are going to undo this 90-year-old kind of super precedent that will really allow for the deconstruction of the administrative state.
something that we're looking closely at, but we don't know where it's going to go with the courts yet, is this question of the employment protections that civil servants, that federal workers have. This is known as Schedule F, and you can get really nerdy on Schedule F, but this is an important question about whether or not Trump can just strip them of their protections. We don't know what the answer will be yet.
I assume eventually they're going to let them. And it's just a matter of kind of dotting the I's and crossing the T's, and it takes time, and, it has to be done correctly. And I think the beginning, when Elon Musk and his Doge folks were coming in, they were being sort of reckless. The reason they went after the probationary people is because they didn't have these protections, but essentially it turns lots of jobs. It changes them from being sort of career civil service jobs to basically making them more akin to political jobs. And then you can remove political people, political appointees. And so I think that they'll be—
Schedule F is really important.
It's hugely important. And this honestly, a year ago, this is when you talk to the people around town, this is what they expected the fight to be, that they thought— they didn't anticipate someone coming in and saying, we're getting rid of all probationary employees, because that actually is totally irrational. Like, the government is graying, it's aging every year. The government desperately needs younger workers. You're absolutely right, Libby, that a lot of these probationary employees are actually people who have been at agencies for 10 or 15 years and just got a promotion. But it's also a lot of people who are like 23 and 24 and have like fresh energy and new ideas, and are like, not, but those are the people they got rid of because they didn't have the protections. And so, arguably the people you do want to, that would be more justifiable to get rid of, are like people who do have protections now, and so they want to take those protections away.
Rhonda, let's talk about immigration. What is catching your eye on immigration and what the courts are deciding there?
Yeah, well, one thing that's kind of newsy today, and this is not yet in the courts, it may be, but we are learning that Homeland Security will be looking at the social media accounts of people applying for immigration, visas, green cards, and seeing if there's any anti-Semitic remarks on their social media. So a lot of free speech advocates and advocacy groups are really concerned about that development, and that may be one area we'll be talking about soon as a court challenge.
And then also, like, what does anti-Semitic content even mean? Like, who's the judge of that? Right, yeah. Right. What are we talking about?
Right. And I think that could actually be the crux of a case one day that, again, we may be talking about here on our podcast. But in terms of how the Supreme Court is approaching questions of immigration status, the use of the Alien Enemies Act. We do know we have that decision from the Supreme Court where they lifted a lower court's block on Trump's use of that Alien Enemies Act of 1798 to deport alleged gang members to El Salvador. Now, again, this was a little bit procedural, where they were saying this case was filed in the wrong court. The case should have been filed where the detainees were. But Trump is sort of taking this as a victory. His people are saying that they sided with him. But it really is depending on how you look at it, too, because the justices do maintain that, yes, there needs to be a reasonable amount of time to give these people due process. You just can't sweep people up and deport them. So again, this may be just a developing area of immigration that we see return back to the court for them to maybe make a stronger ruling in determining how the president is applying this Alien Enemies Act.
Yeah, Rhonda made such an important point about how it's sort of being interpreted and spun. But what do you think, James, in terms of actual application and this question of just getting people out of the country based on this act?
It's really fascinating. So Brett Kavanaugh it was 5 conservatives, or in the majority, might have been 6, saying this wasn't properly handled by DC court, and everyone should have a chance to challenge it, but it needs to be in the jurisdiction where they're detained. And Justice Brett Kavanaugh, who was roommates at Yale Law School with Judge Jed Boasberg, the guy who got this case, said all 9 of us on the court, the conservatives and the liberals, agree that you should have the due process rights to challenge, that you should have the ability to get a lawyer before you're removed under the Alien Enemies Act. And that is a big blow to Trump. But saying DC isn't the right place, it should happen in the places where they're getting rounded up, that potentially, actually, it's not what Trump wants, in the sense that it means hundreds or thousands of individual cases they have to litigate in courts. But Trump is much more likely to get favorable rulings from judges in Mississippi and Texas than he is in Washington, D.C. And so it's not the win that Stephen Miller is out there declaring it is on television, but it also is the Supreme Court not stopping Trump from essentially the thrust of what he wants.
Rhonda, there have been a couple of cases, one in particular that has been reported on, a man who was living in Maryland. He's from El Salvador. He was part of this roundup, taken to El Salvador, put in that really barbaric prison, right? This really, that El Salvador is quite proud of, a mega prison there. Donald Trump is very impressed by the mega prison. It is harsh conditions. The Trump administration, the lawyer admitted that it was sort of a mistake, that he wasn't supposed to be sent back to El Salvador. How is that played out?
I think that's still playing out, actually. And I know the man's family, they've met with members of Congress. They are really pushing for this to be resolved. But what we do know from the Supreme Court is there was a deadline earlier this week for Trump or the administration to return this individual, this Maryland dad, back to the United States. The Supreme Court lifted that deadline and said that the U.S. did not have to return this man by that date and time. I think we are still learning where this case goes. I think, again, this is another area where the Trump administration believes this was a victory, but I think that this is still a case that's going to continue to play out.
A victory just because there was a pause was put on by the Supreme Court of having to get him back. Because the Trump administration has said, oops, we cannot get him back. Like, we can't do it. And the court had said, no, get him back. And the Supreme Court said, well, hold on. Let's look at it.
Right. And so until we can actually assess the merits, this guy's going to be stuck in a Salvadoran prison.
So the Supreme Court hasn't said, we're going to leave him there forever. You have the right to put this guy in prison, even though you say that you weren't supposed to. Yeah. But they're not demanding he get returned until they deal with it, James.
So the Justice Department fired its own lawyer who said that to the judge, who admitted that it was a mistake. And Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, has said that everyone has to zealously advocate for Trump. But if you're a lawyer, you actually get in serious trouble for lying to a judge. You really can get sanctioned for that. And so now, I mean, what's really going on is I think the administration would be fine bringing back this one guy, but they clearly did screw up. He is super sympathetic. But what they're terrified of is if they get El Salvador and Bukele, the president there, to bring back this one guy, then they feel like everyone else is going to have to be brought back pending hearings and adjudicating the deportation. So they're staking out this hardline position where they're pretending like they can't just get this guy back, even though they clearly could ask El Salvador and El Salvador would turn him over because of what they see as the floodgates it would open.
Yeah, one thing that James mentioned that's really important and also points to a bigger thing with Trump's relationship with the Supreme Court and courts in general. You mentioned that the DOJ lawyer who had admitted that this was a wrong and administrative, error when they swept this man up, and he has now been put on leave. If you look at who Trump has placed in areas of power when it comes to legally representing the administration, they often have a tie to him personally. Mm-hmm. He wants loyalists. So the fact that Pam Bondi, the AG, said, okay, we're putting this guy on leave because he is not going with the message of the administration, that's really telling. And I've been actually thinking, like you said at the beginning of our show, last year, this time, we were covering how Todd Blanche was representing Trump in the New York case. Todd Blanche is now the deputy AG. Pam Bondi represented Trump as an impeachment lawyer during his first impeachment case. So he likes to put people in place that he has worked with personally and who will be loyal to him. And I think that's just another sign to pause on when it comes to thinking about how Trump is relating to courts.
Yeah.
What about the cases of so many other men who were sent to that El Salvadoran prison under the auspices of being Venezuelan gang members? Families are saying our guy was not a Venezuelan gang member. What are their legal rights and where does that stand right now, James?
Well, it still has to be adjudicated because essentially what the Trump people want to say is it's too late, they're gone. But it does seem like there's going to be some kind of recourse. Obviously, citizens and people who have legal status, it's a lot harder to remove them than people who don't have any legal status at all. Basically the Trump people are going to try to prevent these people from getting their day in court. I assume they eventually will, based on the nature of that Brett Kavanaugh concurrence, where he's saying all these people should have the right to challenge their deportation. They should also have adequate notice before they're removed. And I mean, the anecdotes continue to pile up about, I mean, it's very clear that a lot of these people are not actually gang members. You know, in one case, it appears that the rationale for removing a guy was that there was an old Facebook photo of him doing like a rock on thing, you know, which they were saying, oh, that's a gang symbol. And then someone else, you know, had a tattoo that said mom, and, you know, that's not. And so will those people get their day in court? And it sort of is it's sort of a black eye on the United States every day that they don't.
So a judge, I want to turn to some of these students who were involved in the pro-Palestinian protest movement. A judge did say that Mahmoud Khalil, who was a Columbia University student, the Trump administration has a deadline now to produce the evidence of why they want to deport him. What are you watching there, James, in terms of legal standing? And because he's not the only one. There are now even more cases of students either getting their visas revoked or getting detained.
So the lawyers for the student complained. They were unhappy about this because they're saying basically like they're being asked to respond to the government claims, and the government was essentially given 24 hours to kind of offer any validation for what they're saying. But the truth of the matter is that the law actually gives very broad discretion to the Secretary of State to revoke someone's visa if they're kind of a threat. And like a lot of these things aren't defined. You were talking about the search of people's social media. The Department of Homeland Security admits that they're going to do that and that they're going to look for anti-Semitism, but they don't offer any. There's no official Department of Homeland Security definition of anti-Semitism. Is that criticism of Israel? Do they consider that anti-Semitism? There's a woman from Tufts outside Boston who we've talked about on the show before. She's being held in Vermont. She's also challenging her removal. And essentially it does appear that the US government's only evidence that she was sort of that she's a threat to national security is that she signed an op-ed with 3 other students that was co-signed by 23 other people criticizing her university, Tufts, for its relationship with Israel, for not basically divesting from Israel. And I think courts are going to be like, it's up there. There's discretion. I mean, I think most Americans would agree that's not fair. That's not very welcoming.
James, you mentioned Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh. Rhonda, who on the court are you watching to be sort of like pivot people? It is a conservative supermajority, but they're not always all in line.
That's true. I think Amy Coney Barrett is someone to watch. Now, I will say that with also this disclaimer that Coney Barrett is very much a conservative judge. I don't think there was any question with that. But if you read some of her opinions over the last year when it comes to, say, Trump's immunity case last year, she didn't exactly agree with sort of widespread immunity. But more recently, she was the conservative judge who joined the liberal judges in the decision on using the Alien Enemies Act. So she dissented with the liberal judges because she doesn't appear to agree with the application of that particular act, and that dissenting opinion does say that it could have life or death consequences. Right now, she is getting a lot of backlash and criticism for being kind of a standout in some of these Trump-related decisions. Elon Musk put out a critical post about her. Mike Lee, a senator from Utah, he said it was disappointing that she dissented with the liberal judges on this question. She's made other decisions as well when it comes to how DOJ tried to freeze the federal funds a few months ago, a few weeks ago, early in the administration.
It all blurs together. We're not even at 100 days yet.
But she joined Chief Justice Roberts on that, but she was the one that got the criticism. And it's so interesting to me too, because I remember covering her confirmation hearing. I remember we all 3 had a live show, yes, on that. And I just remember that the Democratic senators who were on the Judiciary Committee, there was, intense heartburn about having her as this Trump pick because everyone thought she would be in line with Trump. There was a lot of nervousness, specifically about her views on abortion. But I remember in her speech when she took the oath, once she was confirmed, she kept saying that I am not going to be judging in fear or favor of any branch of government. And I think we might be seeing that she is adhering to that promise, that she is kind of going her own way as a conservative judge. But I will say, I don't think she's going to change and become a liberal judge.
Right.
She's just kind of putting a finer point on a lot of these decisions that were related to Trump.
Well, there's clearly the expectation from Trump of total loyalty, and judges and justices that's never been the ethos, right? Now, there are some who do seem to be incredibly loyal to him, but that's really not supposed to be the ethos of wearing the black robe and the little white collar thingy. I want to play some footage from the joint address to Congress that Donald Trump gave. This is, of course, his first big speech to Congress as the 47th president. What we're going to watch is him saying hello to the Supreme Court justices, and we'll listen to what he specifically says to Chief Justice Roberts.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Howard, thank you again. Thank you again. Won't forget. So good.
Thank you again. Won't forget, with a little side tap there, James. I don't know what it means.
I interpreted that as thank you for the immunity decision. But I mean, Chief Justice Roberts is, I think, the person to watch. He is the chief. He is trying to protect the integrity of the judicial system. You saw him put out a statement when Donald Trump and Elon Musk and others were raging against Judge Boasberg to say judges shouldn't be impeached for their decisions and really defending the rule of law. He's now been Chief Justice actually for 20 years. And in that time, especially once conservatives got the majority, they have been very willing to swing for the fences. So Citizens United completely guts campaign finance law. Heller and other decisions really very much expand the Second Amendment. Dobbs obviously overturns a half-century-old precedent on abortion. And the Roberts Court, while it's been willing on some of those hot-button issues to go big, they have gone very small thus far. I think he is saving his powder, keeping it dry, whatever analogy you want to use, trying to keep things narrow, trying to minimize the number of 5-4 decisions. I think Roberts really does want 6-3, 7-2, 8-1, 9-0 ideally decisions, because he thinks that improves the perceived legitimacy of the court. And I think he wants to, when called for, when appropriate, check Trump, prevent him from violating the Constitution, but doesn't want to earn his enmity and doesn't want the Republicans raging against the court because that puts judges' safety at risk, but also because you want people to respect the judicial system so that it becomes untenable for someone like Trump or a future president to say the court's made his decision. Now let them enforce it.
And I'll just add to that, what James is describing, I feel you see in the body language of the clip we played, where he's very stoic and he's not chummy with Trump. He's trying to stay, focus on whatever he was focusing on, but not agreeing with Trump or seeming like they're in on this together. You saw that in the faces of some of the other justices, but clearly Roberts is trying to keep some legitimacy alive in a court that a lot of people are critical of and don't have a lot of hope in, frankly.
Well, he may be able to put off decisions, but ultimately Donald Trump, as well as Americans, are going to look to the Supreme Court to be the ultimate decider of some of these, really conflicted cases. And inevitably it'll go to them, right, James?
Yeah, I mean, the docket is going to be full. The nature of Trump being as aggressive as he is and using the courts as much as he does means that a lot's gonna end up before these justices. They can punt a little bit, even when they have to decide on the merits. You can still look for little off ramps or be narrow, but eventually they're gonna have to decide, is what Trump is doing legal or not? Mm-hmm. And they're gonna uphold more than liberals would like, but they're also not ever gonna give Trump everything that he wants. So they're always gonna be in that position where people on both sides are frustrated with them for different reasons.
Rhonda, James, thank you so much. That does it for Sidebar from the Washington Post. We'll be back with you next week. We're on a Tuesday, Thursday schedule these days. That's when we're taping. You can find us in your favorite podcast app or look for us on YouTube. Search for The Washington Post. I'm Libby Casey. We'll talk to you next week.